What would you do if you were called a traitor in front of 58 million viewers? If you were Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard, a former soldier who has endured the darkest cries of despair on the battlefield, you wouldn't even bat an eye. These are Ilhan Omar's final 15 minutes. Ilhan Omar said the word the way she said everything loudly, chin lifted into the microphone so that every camera in the Senate Hart building could record it. Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard, sitting at the witness table in her dark blue suit with the small American flag pin on her left lapel, heard the word and did not flinch. She had been called worse in Arabic in a combat zone. What you were about to hear is the most personal confrontation in modern congressional history. Two women who served in the same party, the same caucus for 4 years, now facing each other across a Senate hearing room table. One of them is America's top intelligence official. The other is about to learn that calling everyone racist does not work when the person asking the questions is a Hindu combat veteran from Hawaii. The Senate Select Committee on Intelligence held its annual open session on global threats every March. The hearing was typically a quiet affair. The Director of National Intelligence would present a summary of the classified annual threat assessment. Senators would ask careful questions that danced around the classified details underneath, and C-SPAN would broadcast it to an audience of approximately 40,000 retired military officers and foreign policy graduate students, who were the only Americans who actually watched the Senate Intelligence Committee on a dojo Tuesday afternoon in March. This year was different. This year, 58 million people would watch. The hearing room was room 219 of the Hart Senate Office Building, a large windowless chamber with acoustic panels on the walls and a horseshoe table that seated 15 committee members. At the center of the horseshoe sat the chairman to his right, Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas, a former infantry officer with the 101st Airborne Division who had served combat tours in both Iraq and Afghanistan. To Cotton's right, Senator Dan Sullivan of Alaska, a Marine Corps veteran. On the Democratic side, Vice Chairman Mark Warner of Virginia, a former telecommunications executive worth approximately $200 a million, who understood financial misconduct with the precision of a man who had built his fortune by understanding how money moved. At the witness table facing the horseshoe sat Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard. She had been in the position for 13 months. She had been confirmed by the Senate 52 to 48 inches February of 2025. She was 44 years old, a lieutenant colonel in the United States Army Reserve, a combat veteran with 3 deployments to the Middle East and Africa, the holder of a combat infantry badge, a former 4-term Democratic congresswoman from Hawaii, a former Democratic presidential candidate, and as of October of 2024, a member of the Republican Party. She had finished her 2-minute presentation on the annual threat assessment 6 minutes earlier. Iran's nuclear program, China's military buildup in the South China Sea, Russia's continued destabilization efforts in Eastern Europe, North Korea's missile tests, the standard global threat briefing that every DNI delivered every March, updated with the latest intelligence, stripped of its classified details for the open session. Now the committee had opened the floor to questions, and the first person recognized was not a senator. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar of Minnesota had been invited by the Democratic minority to participate as a guest questioner. The invitation was unusual but constitutionally permitted under Senate Rule 26. Omar was not a member of the Intelligence Committee. She was not a member of any committee that dealt with intelligence matters. She had been removed from the House Foreign Affairs Committee by a vote of 218 to 211 inches. February of 2023, following bipartisan condemnation of her anti-Semitic comments about Israel. But the Democratic minority had invited her, and the chairman had not objected. And now she was sitting at the far left end of the horseshoe table with a microphone in front of her and a prepared statement in a manila folder. Sitting beside her was Representative Rashida Tlaib of Michigan, the Palestinian-American squad member who had been Omar's closest political ally since they had entered Congress together in 2019. Tlaib had not been formally invited. She had come as Omar's guest, which was permitted under the committee's visitor rules. The chairman recognized Omar for her questioning period. Omar stood up. She did not need to stand. Witnesses and guest questioners rarely stood in Senate Intelligence Committee hearings, but Ilhan Omar had spent her entire political career understanding that the cameras loved her better when she was on her feet. Director Gabbard, before I ask you about Iran, China, or any of the actual threats facing this country, I want to address the single biggest threat in this room, and that threat is you. Her voice carried the particular cadence that had made her famous, the sharp, rhythmic delivery of a woman who had learned English as her second language and had weaponized its directness in a way that native speakers rarely managed. You are a traitor to the Democratic Party that elected you 4 times. You are a traitor to the progressive movement that raised money for your presidential campaign. You are a traitor to every woman of color who looked at you and saw hope, and who watched you sell yourself to Donald Trump for a cabinet position like a mercenary changing uniforms on a battlefield. She pointed at Gabbard. The gesture was sharp, accusatory. You met with Bashar al-Assad, an international law violator who used banned chemical agents on children in Ghouta. You supported Edward Snowden, a man who took classified intelligence and fled to Vladimir Putin's Moscow. You repeated Russian propaganda about Ukraine word for word, like you were reading from a Kremlin press release. And then you had the audacity to walk into the Republican Party and accept a job from Donald Trump, the man who tried to overthrow American democracy on January 6, 2021. The Republican Party is the party of white nationalism, of restrictive healthcare policies, of Christian extremism. And you, Director Gabbard, a woman who once fought against that party, are now its most useful tool. Their pet traitor, their token woman of color, their proof that even a progressive can be bought if the price is right. She adjusted her hijab, a quick, practiced movement, and continued. So my question, Director Gabbard, is simple. How much did it cost? How much did Donald Trump pay you to betray everything you once stood for? Rashida Tlaib stood up beside her and applauded. 2 Democratic staffers in the back of the hearing room nodded vigorously. Senator Mark Warner, the Democratic vice chairman, shifted in his chair but did not applaud. His face wore the expression of a former CEO who had just watched an employee give an unauthorized press conference. He did not approve, but he was not yet sure whether to intervene. The chairman looked at Gabbard. Director Gabbard, you may respond. Tulsi Gabbard did not stand. Directors of national intelligence did not stand when responding to questions in Senate hearings. She adjusted her microphone by 1/4 of an inch. She looked at Omar, not at the cameras, not at the committee, at Omar specifically, the way she had been trained to look at hostile contacts during her intelligence briefings at Fort Huachuca in 2004. Congresswoman Omar, I heard every word. I am going to respond to each accusation, but I want to establish something first. Her voice was not folksy. It was not theatrical. It was the quiet, measured voice of a military officer delivering a situation report. Flat, precise, stripped of emotion, designed to convey information rather than to persuade. You and I served together in the United States House of Representatives for 4 years. Same party, same caucus. I voted with you on ending U.S. support for the Saudi conflict in Yemen. I co-sponsored legislation with you on refugee resettlement. I sat 20 feet from you in the House chamber every week, from 2017 to 2021. I did not leave the Democratic Party because I stopped caring about those causes. I left because the party stopped caring about them. But we will get to that. First, your accusations. You said I met with Assad. I did. It was a congressional fact-finding visit, the same kind of visit that Dennis Kucinich, a liberal Democrat, made before me. I reported the trip publicly. It was covered by ABC News. No classified information was shared. You said I supported Snowden. At my Senate confirmation hearing in January 2025, I declined to call him a traitor. I said the situation was complex. The United States Senate then confirmed me 52-48 after reviewing my complete classified background. If the Senate determined I was fit to lead the intelligence community, I will defer to their judgment over yours. You said I repeated Russian propaganda on Ukraine. I advocated for diplomatic solutions to a conflict that has caused hundreds of thousands of casualties. Diplomacy is not appeasement, Congresswoman. The alternative to diplomacy is conflict, and the people who fight those conflicts, the soldiers, the Marines, the airmen, are people I served with in Iraq. I have held fallen soldiers in my arms, Congresswoman. Have you? The room went very quiet. Gabbard let the question sit for 3 seconds. That was not rhetorical. It was a real question. I will not ask it again. Tom Cotton leaned into his microphone. Director Gabbard, if I may, I want to add something for the record as a fellow combat veteran, 101st Airborne Division, Iraq and Afghanistan. I want to say that no member of Congress who has never worn a uniform should be calling a combat veteran a traitor in a United States Senate hearing room. Congresswoman Omar, you are entitled to disagree with Director Gabbard's policy positions. You are not entitled to question the patriotism of a woman who earned the combat infantry badge in a combat zone while you were fundraising in Minneapolis. The hearing room absorbed this. Cotton had not raised his voice. He had not needed to. Gabbard continued, "Now, Congresswoman, you have used your time to attack my character. I have responded. I would like to use my remaining time to discuss something directly relevant to this committee's mandate, financial transparency, and potential foreign influence in American politics." She paused. "Specifically, your finances. Let's start with your husband's consulting firm and the $3 million. Your husband, Tim Minett, is a political consultant, Congresswoman. His firm is called E Street Group, LLC. It is registered in the District of Columbia. Between 2018 and 2022, your congressional campaign committee paid E Street Group, LLC approximately $3 million. These payments are documented in 16 separate Federal Election Commission quarterly filings. They are public records. Anyone watching this hearing at home can verify them at fec.gov in approximately 90 seconds. The payments are categorized as compensation for fundraising, consulting, digital communications, internet advertising, and travel expenses. On their face, they appear to be standard campaign expenditures. Many campaigns pay consulting firms. Many consulting firms do legitimate work. Here is where the payments become problematic. Congresswoman, in August of 2019, Tim Minett's then-wife, Dr. Beth Minett, a physician in Washington, D.C., filed for divorce in the District of Columbia Superior Court. Case number 2019CF 7394. Public document. Anyone can pull it. In her divorce filing, Dr. Minett alleged under oath in a sworn court document that her husband had told her he was, quote, romantically involved with you, Congresswoman. She further alleged that his frequent travel for your campaign was, quote, more related to his affair with Representative Omar than with his actual work commitments, end quote. You divorced your then-husband Ahmed Hirsi in 2019. You married Tim Minett in March of 2020. During this entire period, Your campaign committee continued to pay Tim Minnett's consulting firm hundreds of thousands of dollars, including travel expenses, that began the same month that Minette reportedly told his wife about the affair. $3 million of your donor's money. Congresswoman went to a consulting firm owned by a man you were having an affair with, according to his own wife's sworn court filing. And your donors, the small-dollar donors in Minnesota's 5th Congressional District, were never told that their $20 contributions were funding the travel expenses of their Congresswoman's romantic partner. Omar's hand came down on the table. This is a personal attack on my family. This is Islamophobia, dressed up as congressional oversight. You are attacking a Muslim woman's marriage to score political points for Donald Trump. Gabbard's voice did not change. Congresswoman, I am a Hindu woman of color from Hawaii who served 2 combat tours in Iraq. I am reading from a public court filing and from your own campaign's FEC quarterly disclosures. Neither of those documents is Islamophobic, they are paperwork. And Congresswoman, I want everyone watching at home to hear this clearly. If asking about your own public campaign finance filings is Islamophobia, then the word Islamophobia has lost all meaning. And the women who actually suffer from real Islamophobia, the women under the Taliban in Afghanistan, the Uyghur women in Chinese detention camps in Xinjiang, the Rohingya women in Myanmar deserve better than having their suffering weaponized to deflect questions about your husband's consulting fees. Rashida Tlaib grabbed her microphone. Director Gabbard, you are a sellout. You sold your soul to Donald Trump for a cabinet position. You have no right to lecture Ilhan about her family. Congresswoman Tlaib, I served with you in the House. I respect your passion, but you just called me a sellout without addressing a single fact I cited. The divorce filing exists, case number 2019-CF7394. The FEC records exist 16 quarterly filings. Calling me names does not make those documents disappear from the public record. If you have evidence that the filings are inaccurate, present it now. If you do not, please allow me to continue. Tlaib opened her mouth, closed it, did not present evidence, could not. Dan Sullivan leaned into his microphone. It was the first time the Alaska senator had spoken during the hearing. Sullivan was 59 years old, a Marine Corps veteran, and he spoke with the particular economy of a man who had spent his career in environments where unnecessary words cost people their lives. Mr. Chairman, I want to supplement Director Gabbard's testimony with a factual point. The payments that Congresswoman Omar's campaign made to E Street Group LLC are documented in 16 separate FEC quarterly filings between 2018 and 2022. These filings are not opinions, they are not allegations. They are the Congresswoman's own reported campaign expenditures filed under penalty of perjury with the Federal Election Commission. If the Congresswoman disputes the accuracy of the filings, she is disputing her own sworn documents. 3 people had now backed Gabbard's factual presentation: Cotton on military authority, Sullivan on legal precision, and Gabbard herself on the substance. The Democratic side of the hearing room had offered 2 responses: Islamophobia and sellout. Neither had addressed a single dollar. If you were still listening, you just watched a former Democrat tell a sitting Congresswoman that calling FEC filings Islamophobic means the word has lost all meaning, and Gabbard hasn't even gotten to the $30 million yet, or the $250 million, or the brother. Congresswoman, I want to move to something directly relevant to my role as Director of National Intelligence. The intelligence community monitors foreign financial flows as part of its counter-threat mandate, and what I am about to discuss involves financial questions that have been raised at the federal level. According to your 2023 financial disclosure, filed with the House Clerk's Office public document available online, your household assets were valued at approximately $51,000. According to your 2024 financial disclosure filed 1 year later with the same office, your household assets were valued at between $6 million and $30 million. She let the numbers sit. A 600-fold increase in 12 months, Congresswoman, from $51,000 to as much as $30 million in a single year? On January 17th of this year, Elon Musk publicly characterized this wealth increase as fraudulent. I am the Director of National Intelligence. It is not my role to endorse social media posts, but I will note that on February 6th of this year, 5 weeks ago, Chairman James Comer of the House Oversight Committee opened a formal investigation into companies linked to your husband, Tim Minette. Chairman Comer's letter specifically states, and I am quoting, "We want to know who is funding this and who is buying access." End quote. The Oversight Committee investigation is examining two of Minette's companies, EST Crew LLC, a wine business that is currently the subject of a financial misconduct lawsuit filed by an investor named Naeem Mode, who alleges that Minette and his business partner misrepresented the company's financial health and failed to pay promised profits. The second company is Rose Lake Capital. The investigation is examining whether the dramatic increase in the valuation of these companies from virtually nothing to millions of dollars in a matter of months is connected to the Feeding Our Future scandal in Minnesota. I also want to note, Congresswoman, because I think the American people watching at home will find this relevant, your husband's involvement in a wine business raises a question that several journalists have already noted. Traditional Sunni Islam, to which you belong, prohibits the consumption and sale of alcohol. Your husband is profiting from the sale of wine. You have described your marriage as both Islamic and legal. I am not questioning your religious practice. That is your private business. But I am noting that the apparent contradiction between your public religious identity and your husband's commercial activities has been documented in reporting by the Jerusalem Post and the Minnesota Reformer, and that these are legitimate questions of public integrity, not Islamophobia. For the people watching at home who do not know what Feeding Our Future is, between 2020 and 2022, federal prosecutors charged 47 individuals in the state of Minnesota with defrauding federal child nutrition programs of more than $250 million. It is the largest pandemic misconduct case in American history. The majority of the individuals charged and convicted are members of the Somali American community in Minneapolis, which is, Congresswoman, your congressional district. I want to be precise about the connection to you personally. Your campaign committee received donations from individuals who were subsequently charged and convicted in the Feeding Our Future misconduct. This is a matter of public record. The FEC filings show the donation amounts and the donor names. The Department of Justice indictments show the same names with federal case numbers. Anyone watching at home can cross-reference them in 5 minutes. Omar was on her feet before Gabbard finished the sentence. This is a racist attack on the entire Somali community. You are sitting in a United States Senate hearing room and telling the American people that Somali Americans are criminals. This is the most disgusting display of anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim bigotry I have ever witnessed in my time in Congress. You are using the power of the intelligence community to target a community of refugees who came to this country fleeing conflict and persecution. Congresswoman, I am not accusing the Somali community of anything. Gabbard's voice had not risen. It had not varied in pitch. It was the same flat, military-precise voice she had been using since the hearing began. The United States Department of Justice accused 47 specific individuals of a specific federal crime. Those individuals have names, they have case numbers, they have, in many cases, federal convictions. The investigation was initiated under the Biden administration's Department of Justice. The lead prosecutors were appointed by a Democratic United States attorney. The FBI agents who conducted the investigation served under both Republican and Democratic directors. This was not a partisan investigation, Congresswoman. It was a federal criminal investigation that produced 47 indictments and approximately 25 convictions. And I am asking whether your campaign received donations from individuals convicted in that investigation. That is a factual question, not a racial one. And then Mark Warner spoke. The Democratic vice chairman of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence had been silent for the entire hearing. He had watched Omar's opening attack. He had watched Gabbard's response. He had watched the Tim Minette exchange. He had been calculating the way a man who had built a $200 million fortune in telecommunications calculates not emotionally, not politically, but financially. Mark Warner understood money. He understood how money moved, where it came from, and what it meant when money moved in ways that could not be explained. He leaned forward to his microphone. Every Democrat in the hearing room held their breath. Director Gabbard, I want to note something for the record. He paused, looked at Omar, looked back at Gabbard. As the vice chairman of this committee, and as a Democrat, the Feeding Our Future investigation is a matter this committee takes extremely seriously. $250 million in misappropriated federal funds is not a partisan issue. It is a criminal issue. If there are financial connections between the individuals convicted in that case and any sitting member of Congress, regardless of party affiliation, this committee will pursue them. That is our mandate, and I intend to fulfill it. The hearing room registered the statement the way hearing rooms register earthquakes, not with noise, but with a sudden, collective stillness. The Democratic vice chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee had just publicly announced on live C-SPAN that he would investigate a fellow Democrat's financial connections to the largest pandemic misconduct case in American history. Omar turned to Warner, her face wearing the particular expression of a politician who has just been abandoned by her own leadership on live television. Senator Warner? Are you serious right now? You're going to side with Trump as intelligence director against a member of your own caucus? Warner's voice did not waver. It was the cold, precise voice of a man who had negotiated billion-dollar mergers and did not confuse loyalty with complicity. Congresswoman, I am not siding with anyone. I am stating that $250 million of misappropriated federal nutrition money that was supposed to feed children. Congresswoman, children in your district will be investigated by this committee, regardless of who is uncomfortable with the investigation. That is not partisanship. That is oversight. Omar stared at him for 3 seconds. She had no response to misappropriated children's food money. Nobody had a response to misappropriated children's food money. The phrase sat in the hearing room like a weight that could not be moved. You just witnessed the Democratic vice chairman abandoning his own people live on air. If you think every politician has to decipher a $30 million money account, because what comes next, the brother question, is the one nobody has gotten Ilhan Omar to answer in 8 years. Congresswoman, I want to address one final factual matter. Gabbard's voice slowed. Not dramatically, the way a surgeon's hands slow when the procedure reaches the most delicate tissue. The hearing room noticed the change. I am going to address it carefully because the allegations are serious, and because I want to present only facts that are part of the public record. I am not going to speculate. I am not going to editorialize. I am going to read from public documents and ask you to respond. In 2016, during your first congressional campaign, allegations emerged that your second marriage to a man named Ahmed Noor Saeed Elmi may have been part of an immigration misconduct scheme. Multiple investigative journalists and the Minnesota State Campaign Finance Board investigation found what the state investigator described as, quote, substantial evidence of irregularities in the public records surrounding that marriage. The specific evidence in the public record includes the following shared address records between you and Ahmed Noor Said Elmi that predate the marriage and that are consistent with a familial relationship. Social media posts from members of your family that appear to identify Elmi as a sibling, and tax filings from 2014 and 2015 inches, which you and Elmi filed jointly as married, filing jointly, while you were simultaneously legally married to Ahmed Hirsi and living with him at a different address. The Minnesota Campaign Finance and Public Disclosure Board investigated these filings and fined you $650 for improperly filing joint tax returns with Elmi while you were married to another man. That fine is a matter of public record. You have denied the allegations for 8 years, Congresswoman. You have called them racist. You have called them Islamophobic. You have called them a right-wing conspiracy theory. But in those 8 years, you have never provided a specific point-by-point rebuttal of the public records I just cited. You have never released the marriage certificate. You have never provided documentary evidence that Elmi is not your biological brother. You have never specifically explained the joint tax filings. I am not accusing you of immigration misconduct, Congresswoman. I am presenting public records and asking you to explain them. If the records are wrong, you can correct them right now on live C-SPAN in front of the American people and this committee. If they are right, the American people deserve to know. The hearing room waited. These allegations have been debunked repeatedly, Omar said, her voice quieter than it had been all morning. I will not dignify racist conspiracy theories with a response in this forum. Congresswoman, saying debunked is not the same as providing evidence of debunking. The Minnesota Campaign Finance Board fine is a matter of public record. The joint tax filings are a matter of public record. The social media posts are archived and available. Which specific authority debunked these records, Congresswoman? Name the authority. Cite the debunking. Point me to the document. 8 seconds of silence. 12 seconds. Omar did not name an authority. Could not. Tom Cotton leaned forward. Mr. Chairman, I want to note for the record that Director Gabbard has asked a specific question which debunking authority reviewed the public records she cited and concluded the allegations were false. The Congresswoman has had 8 years to identify that authority. She has not done so in any interview, in any press statement, in any legal filing, or in any of the thousands of media appearances she has made since 2016. Saying debunked without citing the debunker is not a legal defense. Congresswoman, it is a talking point, and talking points do not have evidentiary value in a Senate hearing. The phrase hung in the air debunked without a debunker. It was the kind of phrase that would be quoted on cable news for the next 72 hours. Not because it was clever, but because it was true. Omar just said debunked without naming a single authority who did the debunking. 8 years, 0 sources. What Gabbard says next is the reason 58 million people watched this clip, and it starts with the 5 words Ilhan Omar has been running from since 2019. Ilhan Omar stood up. She stood up the way she had stood up at the beginning of the hearing, chin lifted, shoulders back, hands moving, but the energy was different now. At the beginning of the hearing, she had been attacking from a position of moral authority. Now, she was attacking from a position of survival. Director Gabbard, since you want to put records on the table, let me put your record on the table. In January of 2017, you met privately with Bashar al-Assad in Damascus. Syria, an international rights violator, Director Gabbard, a man who used banned chemical agents on children in Ghouta in 2013, banned substances on civilians in Douma in 2018, hundreds of devastating casualties, and you sat across from him and shook his hand and called it a fact-finding mission. The State Department condemned your visit, your own Democratic leadership condemned your visit, and now you sit in the DNI chair and act as if that meeting never happened. You called Edward Snowden a whistleblower, a man who took classified intelligence from the National Security Agency, the agency you now oversee, and fled to Vladimir Putin's protection in Moscow, where he lives to this day as a Russian citizen. You are now in charge of protecting the very classified intelligence that Snowden took. That is not irony, Director Gabbard. That is a national security threat. Sitting in a Senate hearing room in 2022, you said on national television on the record that the conflict in Ukraine could have been prevented if the United States had, quote, acknowledged Russia's legitimate security concerns word for word, the Kremlin's justification for invading a sovereign, democratic nation. You repeated Putin's talking points on American television, and then, after 20 years as a Democrat, after running for president, after taking millions of dollars in Democratic primary donations, you sold yourself to Donald Trump for a cabinet position. The same Donald Trump who was impeached for blackmailing Ukraine. The same Donald Trump who tried to overturn an election. The same Donald Trump who called Somali refugees animals at a rally in my home state of Minnesota. You have no moral standing to question my record, Director Gabbard. Your record includes shaking hands with a mass casualty perpetrator, defending a traitor to the intelligence community, repeating Russian propaganda on American television, and selling your political principles to the highest bidder. You are not a traitor, Director Gabbard. You are a mercenary. Tlaib applauded two Democratic staffers in the back of the room, stood briefly before sitting back down. For 20 seconds, the energy in the hearing room shifted toward Omar. She had landed real punches. She had attacked Gabbard's own record with specific, verifiable facts. And for 20 seconds, the room belonged to her. It was the strongest moment Omar would have for the rest of the hearing. Gabbard waited for the noise to die down. She did not interrupt. She did not raise her voice. When the room was quiet again, she spoke. Congresswoman, you have now accused me of the same 4 things twice in the same hearing. Assad, Snowden, Ukraine, Trump. I addressed all 4 of them in my opening response. I am not going to repeat my answers because the C-SPAN recording exists and the American people can replay it. What I am going to note is something that I think matters more than any of your 4 accusations. You have now spoken for approximately 18 minutes total in this hearing. During those 18 minutes, you have attacked my character, my military service, my patriotism, and my decision to leave the Democratic Party. You have called me a traitor, a sellout, a mercenary, a token, a puppet, and a national security threat. During those same 18 minutes, I have asked you 4 specific questions about your own public record. The $3 million in campaign payments to your husband's firm, the $30 million wealth explosion in 12 months, the campaign donations from individuals convicted in the Feeding Our Future misconduct, and the public records surrounding your marriage to Ahmed Nur Said Elmi. You have not answered any of those 4 questions, not one. Your response to every question has been the same word, racist. The campaign payments are racist. The wealth investigation is racist. The Feeding Our Future connection is racist. The marriage question is racist. 4 questions. 4 times racist. 0 answers. And Congresswoman, since we are discussing your record in full today, I want to add a 5th question, one that I had not planned to raise, but that your repeated use of the word racist has made relevant. In February of 2019, you tweeted that American support for Israel was, and I am quoting your exact words, all about the Benjamin's baby. The tweet was a reference to the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, and it invoked one of the oldest anti-Semitic tropes in Western history, the claim that Jewish people buy political influence with money. The response to your tweet was not partisan, Congresswoman. It was bipartisan. Speaker Nancy Pelosi, the leader of your own Democratic Party at the time, issued a joint statement with Majority Leader Steny Hoyer condemning your remarks. The statement read, quote, "Anti-Semitism must be called out, confronted, and condemned whenever it is encountered, without exception." End quote. That statement was from Democratic leadership about you, about your words. You later apologized. I accept that the apology was sincere, but the pattern continued. In 2021, you tweeted a comparison of the United States and Israel to Hamas and the Taliban, a comparison that drew bipartisan condemnation from members of both parties, including 12 House Democrats who publicly rebuked you in a joint statement. And in February of 2023, the United States House of Representatives voted 218 to 211 to remove you from the House Foreign Affairs Committee. The stated reason your repeated anti-Semitic comments had, quote, brought dishonor to the House of Representatives and disqualified you from serving on a committee that speaks for Congress on matters of international importance. You were removed from the Foreign Affairs Committee, Congresswoman, by a vote of the full House of Representatives for anti-Semitic remarks. And then you came to this hearing room today, a hearing room of the Senate Intelligence Committee, a committee whose work involves sensitive relationships with allied nations, including Israel, and you called me a traitor. 5 questions now, Congresswoman, 5 times racist. 0 answers. I have addressed your accusations twice. You have not addressed mine once. And calling me a mercenary does not constitute an answer to any of them. Congresswoman, I want to end with something that goes beyond you personally, because what happened in this hearing today is a pattern, and the pattern is what I want the American people to see. Gabbard's voice was the same flat military tone it had been for the entire hearing, but the words had changed. They were no longer factual, they were structural. She was building something. You have been asked 5 specific questions about public records today. Your response to all 5 has been the same: racist. The FEC filings are racist. The wealth investigation is racist. The Feeding Our Future connection is racist. The marriage records are racist. The anti-Semitic comments are apparently also racist to ask about, even though the people you offended were Jewish Americans, not you. I know this pattern, Congresswoman. I know it because I was a Democrat for 20 years. I sat in the caucus meetings, I watched the strategy sessions, I watched as the Democratic Party decided that the word racist was more useful as a shield than as a description of actual discrimination. When Republicans ask about the border, racist. When Republicans ask about crime in American cities, racist. When Republicans ask about what children are being taught in public schools, racist. When Republicans ask where $250 million of misappropriated children dollars nutrition money went in your home state of Minnesota, racist. I know this strategy because I was part of it, Congresswoman. I participated in it. I sat in the rooms where it was planned. I listened to the consultants who designed it, and I left. I gave up my congressional seat, my committee assignments, my presidential campaign infrastructure, my donor network, my political future in the Democratic Party, because I could no longer participate in a strategy that cheapened the suffering of people who actually experience discrimination by turning their pain into a political shield for politicians who cannot answer questions about their own finances. That is why I left, Congresswoman. Not because Donald Trump offered me a job, not because I was bought, not because I stopped caring about the causes you and I once shared. I left because I watched a party I had served for 20 years decide that calling every question racist was easier than answering it, and I could not be part of that decision anymore. She looked directly at Omar. At some point, Congresswoman, and I say this as someone who left the strategy, who walked away from it, who gave up everything to walk away from it at some point, calling every question racist stops being a defense. It starts being a confession. a confession that you do not have an answer, that the money went where it should not have gone, that the records say what you do not want them to say, that the questions are legitimate, and the silence is the only response you have left. I am not a racist, Congresswoman. I am a Hindu woman of color from Hawaii who served 2 combat tours in a conflict zone. You cannot call me a supremacist. You cannot call me privileged. You cannot call me an Islamophobe, because I have spent my career defending religious freedom for every faith, including yours. What you can call me is a patriot who left your party because your party lost its way. And what the American people can call you based on the public records presented in this hearing today is accountable for the first time in 8 years. The hearing room was silent, and in that silence, Ilhan Omar reached up with her right hand and adjusted her hijab. It was a small gesture, the kind of gesture she had made 1,000 times in her political career, in press conferences, in committee hearings, in television interviews, on the floor of the House of Representatives. A habitual gesture of comfort, the quick touch of fabric that reminded her who she was and where she came from and what she believed. But this time, the gesture repeated. She adjusted the hijab a second time. Her fingers found the fabric exactly where it had always been. She smoothed it, she let go, and then 3 seconds later, she adjusted it a third time. The same spot, the same movement, the same fabric, as though the first 2 adjustments had not accomplished what they were supposed to accomplish. The cameras caught the triple adjustment. C-SPAN's wide shot captured it clearly. Tom Cotton saw it from his seat. Dan Sullivan saw it. Mark Warner saw it. Tulsi Gabbard saw it. And she recognized it for what it was, because she had seen the same gesture in a different form on the faces of soldiers who had just received news. They were not prepared to receive the repetitive movement of a person searching for something familiar in a moment when nothing felt familiar anymore. Each time Omar's fingers found the hijab exactly where it had always been. Each time the comfort the gesture had always provided was no longer there. Gabbard spoke her final words. Congresswoman, I want to say one last thing. Not as the Director of National Intelligence, not as a Republican, not as a former Democrat, as a soldier in the military. When someone asks you where the money went, you answer. When someone asks you where the equipment went, you answer. When someone asks you where the ammunition went, you answer. You do not call the question racist. You do not call the questioner Islamophobic. You open the books, you show the receipts, you account for every dollar, because accountability is not optional. In the military, it is the foundation of everything. I have been accountable for 23 years in uniform. I am asking you to be accountable for one afternoon in a hearing room. You have chosen not to be. I yield my time, Mr. Chairman. The chairman gave the hearing closed. Based on the public records and testimony presented today, the committee will refer matters discussed in this hearing to the Department of Justice, the House Ethics Committee, and the House Oversight Committee for further review. The committee notes Vice Chairman Warner's statement regarding bipartisan investigative intent. This open session of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence stands adjourned. The gavel fell. Rashida left first. She gathered her papers in a single movement. The movement of a woman who wanted to be anywhere else, and walked out through the main doors of the hearing room without looking at Omar, without looking at Gabbard, without looking at anyone. She was on her phone before she reached the hallway. The reporters waiting outside did not get a statement. They got the back of her head. Mark Warner left second. He gathered his notes carefully, the way a $200 million businessman gathers his notes, which is to say, slowly and deliberately. Because Mark Warner did not rush. He walked past Omar's seat on his way out. He did not pause. He did not offer a word of comfort. He did not offer a word of criticism. He offered nothing. He simply walked past, and the silence of his passing was louder than anything he could have said. Ilhan Omar was the last person on the Democratic side to leave. She sat at the far end of the horseshoe table for 90 seconds after the gavel fell. The cameras were still rolling. C-SPAN kept its cameras on for several minutes after the gavel in high-profile hearings, and the cameras captured her sitting alone, her hands flat on the table in front of her, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere between the empty chair where Mark Warner had been sitting and the witness table where Tulsi Gabbard had spent the last hour dismantling her political career. After 90 seconds, she adjusted her hijab one more time, the fourth time. Then she stood, she straightened her jacket, she picked up her manila folder, the folder that had contained her prepared statement, the statement that had called Tulsi Gabbard a traitor and had expected the hearing to end shortly after that word was delivered. She walked to the side door of the hearing room, not the main door where the reporters were waiting with cameras and microphones and questions she did not want to answer. The side door, the staff door, the door that led to the service hallway that ran behind the committee rooms on the second floor of the Hart Building. She left through that door. It closed behind her without a sound. On the other side of the hearing room, Tom Cotton shook Gabbard's hand. "Well done, Director." "Just doing my job, Senator." "That is exactly what I mean." Dan Sullivan nodded the Marine-esque nod, the nod that said everything a Marine needed to say without saying it. Tulsi Gabbard picked up her briefing folder from the witness table. She straightened the small American flag pin on her left lapel, a habitual gesture she had made after every hearing since becoming DNI, the way soldiers straighten their uniforms after a formation. She walked out through the main doors of the hearing room, past the cameras, past the reporters, past the questions. She did not stop. She did not comment. She walked to the elevator at the end of the hall, and the doors closed behind her, and she went back to work. Tulsi Gabbard was at her desk at the Liberty Crossing Intelligence Campus in McLean, Virginia, at 6:15 the next morning, 14 hours after the hearing had ended. On the desk, the president's daily brief, which needed to be reviewed and annotated before delivery to the White House at 7:30, 2 cups of black coffee, a secure telephone, a stack of overnight cables from the CIA station in Taipei that had arrived at 4 inches the morning and required her personal review before the morning interagency call. The hearing was over. The clip was at 58 million views. Congresswoman Omar had released a press statement at 11:00 the previous night, calling the hearing a racist spectacle orchestrated by Trump's intelligence puppet. The statement had 12,000 retweets. Gabbard had not read it. She had read the overnight cables from Taipei instead, because the overnight cables were her job, and her job did not stop because of a hearing. On the shelf behind her desk, there were 3 objects: a photograph of her unit in Iraq, 3rd Squad, summer of 200512 soldiers, standing in front of an armored vehicle at Camp Taji. 3 of the soldiers in the photograph had not come home. A combat infantry badge in a glass frame, the real badge, not a replica, and a small American flag that her unit had flown at the base camp during her second deployment, folded into the standard triangle in a shadow box. She opened the president's daily brief, page 1, Iran, page 2, China, page 3, Russia. The hearing had mattered, but this morning, 3 nuclear-armed nations were waiting for her assessment, and that mattered more. Director Gabbard picked up her pen, opened the intelligence brief to page 1, and went back to work. Somewhere in Minneapolis, a congresswoman was still writing press releases about yesterday. The Director of National Intelligence did not have that luxury. Tomorrow as threats do not wait for today as politics to finish. If you made it this far, you just watched a former Democrat who served 2 combat tours in Iraq, now America's top intelligence official, dismantle a sitting congresswoman using nothing but public records, military comm, and the particular authority of a woman who left her own party because she believed in something bigger than politics. You watched Tom Cotton tell a congresswoman that she had no right to call a combat infantry badge holder a traitor, and you watched Ilhan Omar adjust her hijab 3 times in 15 seconds, while 58 million Americans watched on C-SPAN. Share this with everyone who has ever been called a traitor for doing the right thing. God bless the Constitution. God bless the men and women of the intelligence community who work at desks in McLean, Virginia, at 6:15 inches the morning, while politicians write press releases about yesterday. God bless every soldier who earned a combat infantry badge in a place most Americans cannot find on a map. And God bless every American who has ever left a party, a job, a friendship, or a comfortable life because staying would have meant pretending that the questions did not matter. The questions always matter, and the traitor, the one they called a traitor, was the only person in the hearing room who answered every single one of them. When the dust finally settles and the cameras turn off, are we left with true accountability? Or is this just another tragic chapter in a deeply divided political landscape?